All right, so we got an update for the EOS R5 last week. It's a pretty big deal for video, so let's talk about it for a minute. Well, hey, what's up? My name is Tony. If you do not know who I am, I'm a filmmaker photographer in the St. Louis area. I talk a lot about the EOS R5 and the R6. These are cameras that I use every day, and I love using them as hybrid shooting cameras. I love them for photo, and I love them for video, and I use them all the time. Well, we just got the update for version 1.4 for the R5. Now, we got the R6 a couple weeks ago, and it's been really well received because you can do the dual card slots and C-Log 3. Well, the R5 finally gets 1.4, and I argue that this is just as important of an update. The first thing that it does is it adds dual card slot recording for video, which it didn't have before. Now, the R6 had that so that you can record both SD cards simultaneously with video. That way you have a redundancy. You have a backup video file in case one card dies or goes under or whatever, you have trouble with it. Now you can do that with the R5. The only stipulation is that you cannot record RAW to the SD card, which you couldn't do anyways. So basically that's the stipulation that you have. You can record, say you want to record 4K RAW on one, and then on the SD card you could record 4K regular. So other than that, you can record, 4K regular, all in C-Log 3 or C-Log, no problem at all now with the simultaneously card recording, which is a big deal. It's good to have that redundancy when you're talking about professional shooting. The other big thing that this firmware update does is it adds the compatibility of 8K RAW up to 30 frames per second of 10-bit 422 ProRes external recording. Meaning you could plug in an external recorder onto your R5 and record 8K RAW, trying to get around that overheating problem that we saw earlier in the year and last year when it was released. Now, let's talk about this for a little bit. The R6, the one I'm shooting on right now, I've had that one start to overheat quite a bit in the past few months. And I think the reason why is I'm pushing it a lot harder than I have in the past, because it's kind of proven to me that it is okay to use this camera in professional shoots. But I'm starting to see now, man, it is like, my Jeep was reading like 101 earlier. It is hot right now, and I'm doing a lot of outside jobs, and when I'm using the R6, it starts to overheat. Now for me, I can kind of avoid it. I either drop down to 24, which buys me a little bit more time, or I switch to another body, which is not a big deal. I'm not using all of my camera bodies all at the same time. I've always got a backup, and I can let it kind of cool down a little bit. With the R5, it will overheat shooting in 4K 60 internally. It will start to warm up. I was at a wedding, and it was starting to overheat just a little bit. But if you flip it down to 4K 24 frames per second, your timer jumps way back up. I actually did a shoot last Sunday. We were shooting in a bread factory, and we shot that thing for probably like 3+ hours solid, just kind of recording and taking a break every 10 minutes or so, but just recording. That was all 4K 24 frames per second, and I didn't have any trouble. It never even lowered the timer so that you can see that you're starting to overheat. So for this camera, if you're shooting in 4K 24 frames per second, I wouldn't ever worry about it overheating at all. But obviously when you're shooting in 4K 60 and you're shooting in 8K, once you get into the RAWs, it starts to overheat because it's such a tiny little body and there's no venting in it. And I mean, honestly, the way that I use these cameras, these are my running guns. They're gonna be on Ronins, so I'm not gonna be shooting a ton of slow motion in those, long format kind of shoots. I'm gonna be doing, little short clips and turn the camera off, and then re-record short clip and then turn the camera off. So I don't really have trouble with them overheating. Now, if you wanted to shoot an interview in 8K, one, you're gonna have to have a big old memory card, big, and these things get expensive. You're talking like $800 for a CF Express Type B card. And I've got one, what have I got here? I've I've got a 128. So this is just enough to let me record 4K 120 and the occasional 8K shot that I need. So most of the time I'm shooting in 4K and I'm just using the SD cards because that is a lot more affordable and it's an easier workflow for me because most computers have SD card slots. But if you need to shoot on the high end kind of formats that you can really take advantage of the R5, then you're gonna need a CF Express Type B. Now, if you're recording externally, say you're recording on like the new Atomos Ninja 5 Plus that just came out, you can now record in 8K. But what's really nice about all of that 8K RAW is that it goes right onto an SSD. So you don't have to worry about memory cards, you don't have to worry about the 29-minute countdown. All of those kind of things are kind of gone when you're recording externally. Plus, you get the advantage of having a bigger screen. Now, for me, like I said, I'm using these cameras for run and gun, so I like to keep my setup minimal, and I like to keep the package as small as possible. And so I usually almost always record internally and never have trouble with that. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal to be able to output that 8K RAW video. You don't really lose any quality. I don't have the Ninja 5 Plus to be able to test it out, but there's plenty of other videos you can go check it out. It is a big deal though, because this is making this camera a little bit more video centric. Like when it first came out, a lot of people just hated it and said it's completely unreliable. And I don't think that that's true. I think that you need to know your camera. And obviously, no matter what camera you have, whether it's a Sony, whether it's a camera or a Canon or a Panasonic, you don't go into a paid job without any kind of a backup. That just doesn't make any sense. So regarding all of that, I personally have not had hardly any problems with these overheating. Yes, you can overheat them, and I've been pushing them kind of to the limit when it comes to that. And then you got to start getting into cine gear, which you're talking the C70, the C200 that also shoots 4K 60 with no problem, C300 Mark III with that dual gain output. Beautiful images out of those cinema cameras, but they get bigger and bulkier. And the reason that I like these little mirrorless cameras is you can throw it on a gimbal and really get some cool shots. All right. Let's get back to the update. A couple other things they did, and this is another thing that's helping me understand that Canon is looking at this as a viable video camera, is they just added some support for some cine lenses for this camera, which is pretty cool. I'm glad that they added that into this firmware update. And then they did just a couple house cleaning, a couple bugs that they're still working out. And I just am really grateful that we are continuing, even after a year, getting really solid updates for these cameras. And I'm excited about them. As far as the R3, I haven't talked about that camera much at all, but I don't really talk a lot about rumors. I usually talk about once Canon releases it, then we'll dive into the camera. But as far as the R3, I don't personally see myself getting that. That strictly is like a photo, like a sports photo workhorse. And I don't do any sports really, and I don't do anything that needs that high speed action kind of shots. 30 frames per second for photos, which is incredible. It really is. But the R5, the R6 are great cameras for me to use for what I use them for. All right, guys. Well, if you've got any comments about the firmware, if you have trouble getting it onto your camera, let me know. It's the same process. You go to Canon's website, you download the firmware, stick it on an SD card, stick it in the back of your camera, and you hit firmware update, and it does its thing. This one was fairly smooth for me. I did hear that somebody else had trouble with it, but for me, it was really easy. All right, leave some comments in the comments section if you've got them. Otherwise, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. We talk a lot about Canon camera gear, and I'm just excited that you're here. All right, guys, I think I've got a tutorial coming up in the next few days, and then I'm doing some traveling to Colorado for an expo, so I may bring you along with that kind of adventure that I'm gonna be doing on my new motorcycle. Picked up a new Africa Twin. If you're into motorcycles, I sold my Triumph and my original Cruiser, and I got this new one, so all sorts of fun toys happening. All right, guys, we'll see you in the next one.